Alright, what's good everyone? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you some tips and tricks for the Z Fold 6 camera and also how you can maximize your cameras on this phone. So let's get into it. So the first quick and easy tip that you might not know about is on a lot of Android phones, especially Samsung phones, you can double tap your power button to start your camera app. So double tap power button and boom, I'm in the camera app real quick. The second tip is that you have a lot of different options for, camera modes on this phone. So what you can do is go to more right here. You'll see additional modes. What I like to do is I like to go to the plus, and now you can drag the different camera modes that you might use more often to the bottom menu right here. So that's always there by default. And then you can also organize them in whatever order you want. So for example, let's say you mainly use photo and video mode together. So then you have them side by side. So basically the way that I have mine set up is that I'll put pro photography mode next to the regular photo mode, and then the pro video mode right next to the video mode. So that way I can, if I'm doing something, like if I'm filming video, then sometimes I'll go back and forth between pro video and regular video just for like different types of shots. And the same thing with photography. I might go back and forth depending on what kind of shots I want. And then I use portrait occasionally for like videos. I don't really use portrait that much, but just to test out the cameras, I have it here. Night mode, in the normal photo mode, it turns on automatically, so you don't necessarily need the night mode. Basically, this tip is that you can organize your camera layout so that you can have specific camera modes always available and in the order that you want. The next tip is to go into your settings in the camera app and then make sure that you have camera assistant installed, and you're just going to go here and turn on this right here. This is the 2x zoom shortcut. You just want to turn that on so that way when you're in your camera app, now you have 2x zoom right here by default and it just stays there. This phone doesn't have a native 2x zoom camera lens, so it goes 1. And then a couple more quality of life things that I would turn on in the camera settings are, 1, I would turn off auto FPS in video. I feel like I don't really like when the camera is constantly shifting between, different FPS, raising or lowering the FPS, because it kind of makes the video look choppy at times. It will definitely affect the brightness of the video as well. So personally, I rather just leave it off. So whatever I set it to, if I'm recording at 60 FPS, I'd rather the camera just keep recording at that. I'll turn on track and autofocus. So if I select something in the shot, then I want the camera to keep staying on focus and on that. And then grid lines is very important to me, so I'll turn that on as well. Grid lines basically just helps you line up your shots, your videos, your photos, and all that stuff. And then I also will go to shooting methods and then turn on voice commands so that you could say smile, cheese, capture, or shoot to take a picture, or you can record videos by saying record video. So that's also nice to control your phone without using your hands. You can also show your palm as well, which is decent, so I turn that on as well. And then settings to keep is very important. So I turn on camera mode, high picture resolutions, and portrait zoom. Settings to keep basically just means that whenever you change a setting in the camera app, these specific settings will stay the same no matter if you leave the app or not. If this is turned off, then that means the camera mode will reset every single time. So for example, I turn it off, so I'm on pro photography. If I close the camera app, then start it again, it's gonna go back to the default photography. So I like to just turn on camera mode setting, and so that way I can just jump back into what I was doing before. The last quality of life thing I'll point out is camera timeout. So sometimes I might have my phone on the tripod or something and I'm not necessarily using the camera at the moment, but I want the camera app open so I can see the viewfinder, especially with the outer screen. I'll show you that later on. Then I'll turn on camera timeout to 10 minutes so it doesn't just turn off the phone, because I'm still doing something. I'm just not using the phone at the moment. All right, so now let's go through the basics of the camera app. So obviously at the bottom, you got your zoom levels. So this switches between the different lenses and the digital crop. So 0.6x is going to be your ultra wide camera. And then 1x is going to be the main wide camera. Then 2x is still the main wide camera. It's just cropping in on the sensor or the image. And then 3x is the zoom camera. You can go through the different zoom lengths with the different shortcuts. But what I like to do for a little bit more precision is you can touch the normal zoom length selector and then drag your fingers. So now you can kind of adjust it in increments, so it's more precise for what you want to do. Like sometimes you might not always want to be at 10x, but so maybe you go to like 8x or 7.5x or whatever is necessary to get the shot that you want. This button right here, you can switch the camera, and you can also switch the camera by double tapping the power button while you're in the app as well. Now at the top, you got your settings. Obviously, you got your flash, so you can turn flash onto auto or just on always or off always. Then you got a timer. You got 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Then you have your different aspect ratios. Aspect ratio is basically the size of the image or the screen. So for example, this is 3x4. If you rotate it like this, it becomes 4x3 because now it's in landscape. But then if you go to 9x16, 9x16 is more of like a traditional camera. So actual camera will shoot in 16x9 or 9x16 if you're in vertical. And what this is basically doing is cropping in on the sensor. So it doesn't actually change the sensor size or the native aspect ratio for this camera. So if you look at the image right here, I'll take one in 9x16, then I'll go 3x4. And basically, if you look at it, so you're zooming in and a lot of the detail, a lot of the things on the sides of the image are being cut out because you're going closer to the subject versus this where you see there's so much more that is caught in the image. So 16x9 or 9x16, you're basically shooting that mode for aesthetic purposes, but I would suggest that you just shoot in the normal 3x4 mode because it captures the most detail because it's the native aspect ratio, and then literally just crop the image. So let's say I want to take a picture of this flower, but I want it to be in 9x16. I can go to edit, and then from here there's a little box that says free. You can tap that and then press 9x16. Automatically crops, and now you have the freedom of choosing. Now you have the freedom of choosing what you want the framing to look like. So now I can save that like that, and boom. It's gonna be 9x16, but a little bit higher quality than just shooting it straight out of the camera because that's not the native aspect ratio. And then you got the megapixel mode. So by default at the top right here, you got 12 megapixels. And then if you tap it, it goes to 50 megapixels. And that only works for the main camera because the main camera is a 50 megapixel shooter. The rest of them are not 50 megapixels. Basically, shooting in 50 megapixels means you're gonna capture a higher quality and more detailed image, but the phone's processing is gonna be a little bit different because of how big the file size will be and all the information that 50 megapixels is capturing versus 12. So if I take a 50 megapixel shot right here, the phone's gonna take a little bit longer to actually process that image versus 12 megapixel shot, it processes it way faster. And it also does a little bit more tuned and optimized, I think. So basically the only reason you would want to shoot 50 megapixels if you are, let's say, taking a picture that you plan on blowing up and putting as a wallpaper on your computer or, you know, printing it out, then you would want to shoot with the most megapixels possible to retain that information and that detail in the image. But also, if you're going to shoot in 50 megapixels, then you want to make sure that you hold the camera as steady as possible or just put it on a tripod, because the camera takes a little bit longer to process the image and take the shot. When you're shooting at higher megapixel modes, in 50 megapixels, you also don't have as many features, so you can do digital zooms. Digital zoom is basically just zooming in on the image like you would like if you're editing it. Basically editing the image before you actually take the picture. Optical zoom, or like just a normal zoom, is when it's literally what the camera is capable of doing. So in 50 megapixels, because the main sensor is the only one that has 50 megapixels, obviously you cannot optically zoom. You can't use the zoom camera. You have to digitally crop on the image that you're shooting. But if we go back to 12, then you have this right here. So this is motion photo. If you've had an iPhone, then you probably are familiar with this. But basically, you take an image and then it captures, you know, moments before and after the image. And then when you tap on the image or view a motion photo, then it shows you a little video of what happened before and after you took the shot. Personally, I like to turn it off because I don't like that feature, really. And it's not something that I use, but if you use that, then cool, keep it on. Then you got your filters. So, of course, there's like generic filters like warm, cool, light. And you can also adjust the strength of the filter, which is pretty cool. And, you know, some other creative ones that they have here. But one thing that is cool is that you can actually create your own filters. So you can download filters from the Galaxy Store, which is a really cool thing because you can do different things based on different looks that might be out there. And then you can also create your own filter using images. So let's say I go to this image right here of my daughter at a birthday party, and I want to use that look and that style. The phone will try to create a filter based on this image. And I think you can actually select different parts of the image to focus on like the aesthetic you're going for. So press done. This is the reference area, and now I'm getting those kind of colors. So manually creating a different kind of filter, and I could just use that now. And you can also name the filter too before you save it. Leave it on, and then you can just quickly take pictures in a certain style and look. So this is with the filter that I just created. That is the basic photo mode of the camera app. So now let's go to video. So video is the same stuff, kind of. You got your different zoom levels, and you can do the same thing by sliding. And then you also have auto framing. So if you put your phone on a tripod, or it's a Z Fold, so if you open it up and then you have the camera right here and your phone is propped up, you can have it set to auto frame. So if you're walking around and moving around, then the phone will follow you as the subject, and that's pretty cool. And you can do auto frame up to 4K 30. You can only do 30 FPS in auto frame, unfortunately, but it's still a pretty cool feature to have. At the top, you have your flash. Then you also have your action mode. You have super steady mode, which basically, it works really hard to use software to stabilize the image to make it look very smooth and not shaky when you're walking or moving the camera around. And you can do this up to 4K 60, which is pretty cool. When you're using super steady, you got to make sure you have a lot of light because, like I said, it's cropping in on the image and it's doing a lot of software stuff to stabilize the image. Even though stabilization by default is pretty good, but when you're using that mode, just make sure you have a lot of light because it's less detail. Then you got your different aspect ratios. So you can shoot in 1:1, which is a square basically, or you can shoot in full, which is like the whole screen. It's kind of like a movie aspect ratio right here. And then you got the default 9:16. So video is normally shot in 16:9. This is what all our TVs and our monitors, they're all that aspect ratio. So when you watch a video, it takes up the whole screen, and that is why 16:9 is the default for video mode. And it is a slight crop on the sensor. But yeah, in video mode, you can go up to 8K. Personally, I don't use 8K because it's unnecessary. Nobody has an 8K monitor, so you can't actually reap the benefits of that. However, 4K, you can see the benefits on a lower quality display. You can technically with 8K as well, but I feel like anything higher than 4K is kind of like diminishing returns and like there's not much value in it. So up to 4K 60 is probably where you want to be. And then you, of course, you got 1080p at full HD and then 720 at HD 30. I personally wouldn't use this unless you really want to save your storage, but honestly, full HD is good enough for saving your storage. Then you got your filters, just like I showed before. Another quality of life change that I would choose is going to advanced video options and changing it from HEVC to H.264, because H.264 is just more compatible than H.265, which is this one. And also in terms of video editing, this is a lot easier than this one right here. Even though this will save you some storage on your phone, like the files will be smaller, H.264 is just better in general for more use cases. All right, so now let's get into portrait mode. So basically portrait mode, you guys probably already know about it. People have been using this for a long time now. But portrait mode adds a fake artificial blur behind the subject to kind of give it like this portrait look. With a real camera, you use a specific lens combination to get a very shallow depth of field. So that means that the subject is in focus, and then behind the subject, you see everything else is blurred off. So portrait mode is kind of trying to accomplish that with software rather than the hardware itself, because smartphone cameras have smaller sensors, which means that the depth of field is not going to be that shallow. So there's not going to be like a strong bokeh, like a strong fall off of focus from the subject. And a lot of people like that fall off of focus when it comes to like shooting portrait mode shots of people and different kinds of subjects. So yeah, portrait mode allows you to accomplish that kind of look, but artificially using software. And in portrait mode on the Z Fold 6, you have different options with the zoom levels. So you got 1x, and then you got 2x, and obviously 3x. And basically what you can do is you can adjust the strength of the blur. So you can make it more subtle, more soft, or you can just make the blur go crazy. But obviously the processing and the way the image looks might be more disrupted. There's more room for failure when you increase the blur level a lot. And also this works better when you're standing a little bit further away from the subject. And then if you go to these different filters then you have some different options. So in studio, you have the option of adjusting the way the lights look to kind of give it like a studio photography vibe. I think that's the idea that they're going for here. So you can slide this up or down. And then the next one is high key mono. And basically you're shooting a very interesting monochromatic shot. And then you got low key mono. I think it's the same thing, but just opposite. So focus there. And yeah, so it's a pretty interesting kind of, photography option right here that you can mess around with. I think it actually looks kind of cool, the low-key mono. And then you got backdrop. So if you put, obviously I'm not taking a picture of a person right now, but I think this is mainly just focusing on like a face. And then the last one, you have color point. So you can basically highlight the color of the main subject, and then everything else will kind of be grayed out or like desaturated. So yeah, these are just some different stylistic options you have in portrait mode, but mainly people are going to use it for the default option right here, which is just the blur. And I think it works pretty well on these modern phones. But to be honest, if you want to take a portrait shot, I would just go in pro mode and try to get as close to your subject as possible for natural bokeh to happen. Then you can also use the zoom lens to accomplish that as well. And like, of course, the natural fall off, the blur in the background is not going to be as dramatic as the portrait mode shots, but I feel like you can definitely accomplish some pretty good images. Like, look, you see, this is not using portrait mode, this is just pro mode, and the background is blurred out because that's just how cameras work with different focal lengths. And this doesn't have the biggest sensor in this phone, but I think you can accomplish some pretty good portrait shots in pro mode without using portrait mode. Portrait mode, because it's so like artificial and it's like creating an image stitching together with effects, the quality of the images is going to be lower, and then there's always room for the software to make errors when cutting out the subject and stuff like that. So yeah, I would suggest just trying to mess around with pro mode instead. And then at the top, you can obviously switch between your different aspect ratios, and that's about it for portrait mode. Night mode, it's basically regular photo mode, but just night mode, which means it's exposing for a longer time. It's leaving the shutter open longer than normal to capture more light. That's why this is good for night. But in the normal photo app, night mode will come up when there's less light in the image anyways. Like, as you can see, the moon, when I cover the camera, the moon is showing up right here. You just tap that and then it will turn on night sight and then take a little bit longer to take an image, but it gives you a better looking image at night. Personally though, again with that, you can accomplish the same thing in pro mode and get an even better looking image because it's not using the same software processing that night mode is using, which kind of makes night images look like daytime. And personally, I don't like that look, so I rather pro mode to get an actual night shot that looks like nighttime, but to expose properly to how I want it to look. And then the next mode, you got food mode. So this is kind of just like trying to make food look really nice. Obviously, I don't got no food right here, but you can turn on or off the blur effect, adjust the aspect ratio, and adjust the color, temperature. And yeah, it's really just trying to make food look nice. So there's that. You can accomplish this with other camera modes as well. You don't need to use food mode. You got panorama. Panorama is just, you know, taking a panoramic shot. So you press it, then you move it around, following the guide to get a wider than normal shot. And you could do that in ultra wide or in 1x. You got portrait video, which basically is portrait mode with the artificial blur, the fake blur, but in video format. Then you got single take, which takes a photo and a video at the same time, and you can do different things with it, like original video, you can reverse it, and it like adds music and stuff like that. It's an interesting little mode. Personally, I don't use it that often, but yeah, in the top right, you got different things that you can select for capturing. So like boomerang clips, where it kind of goes one way and then goes back the other way. Filtered pictures, collages. And then you got hyperlapse. Hyperlapse is basically capturing a video for a long time and then speeding up really fast. You generally use this for like things like capturing the sky and like seeing the clouds move over the course of hours. Yeah, it's just, you can create some cool looking videos with hyperlapse. They just take a little bit of time. Then you got slow-mo. Personally, just don't use slow-mo. Like, don't use this mode. You could if you want to get something quick, I guess, but you really don't need to do this to achieve slow-mo. Like, what you do to get slow-mo is just record in 60 FPS, and then you go into your video editing app and just slow it down by 50%, and there you go. You have smooth looking slow-mo. But the cool thing, I guess, with the slow-mo mode is that you can record in 4K 120 FPS right off the bat. So that's kind of nice. And then you have dual recording. So this is one that I think is pretty cool. So as you can see, you can record with both cameras at the same time. So this is perfect for like vlogging and, you know, recording both perspectives, your perspective and then also what's going on in the background. You can do this up to 4K 30, and you can adjust the layout. So you can switch it like this, top and bottom split, or if it's horizontal landscape, then you can split it half of the screen. And then when it's like this, you can move around the smaller image as well. And that happens in real time. So if I record a video right here and I'm moving it around, if I end the video, then I go into it in the gallery, you can see that it's actually moving around in real time in the video clip. So this is a really cool option for like vlogging and stuff like that. I don't think many phones have this. And then you can also choose which two lenses record the video. So this was the front camera and the ultra wide camera, but you can also do like, let's say the ultra wide and the main camera, or the main camera and the zoom lens. So now you got two different kinds of perspectives. I think that is really sick, to be honest. And the fact that you can change the layout, actively compare the two different perspectives or use it for like different video effects or whatever you want to do. And you can take a picture. And you can choose to save the videos in separate files or save it as previewed as in one file. I think that would be the option to go with if you're doing something like this. So yeah, it's just a really cool option, really cool mode for different things. There's so much potential in this. And then you have Bixby Vision. So basically this is kind of like Google Vision, where you can search the internet for different things. So right now I put it in front of the camera and then it's showing results. So it's telling me what kind of flower it is. Pretty cool. So yeah, that's basically what Bixby Vision is. It's just a way to Google search with your camera. And then you got AR Zone. So you can do different things with augmented reality. You can create your augmented reality stickers and, you know, just take some creative photos with them. It's a lot of fun stuff if you want to mess around with it. Personally, I don't do this stuff too much, but it's there for the people who enjoy these kind of fun party tricks. And then the last camera mode is this right here, Expert RAW. This one, I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'll make a dedicated video for it because there's a lot. It's like the pro photography mode, except there's a lot more controls. So you got your general controls at the bottom, but then you have so much more. Like you can save different presets. So for example, if I know frequently outside, I'll shoot at 1/125, shutter speed, and then I'll have the ISO at like 100. That's like a default setting. Then I'll save that camera preset, and then I can call it like outside 1. Boom. So now I have that preset just there. Those settings are always going to be there. So if I go into Expert RAW app, then I can just automatically switch. So let me just show you now I'm automatic mode. So now I'm in auto, and then if I go outside, I just press outside 1, and boom, now my settings come back. So that's pretty cool that you can have presets. And at the top, you got, you know, your different megapixel options, but this time you have 24 megapixels. This kind of matches the 24 megapixels that the iPhone 15 Pro Max shoots at by default, or the new iPhones in general shoot at 24 megapixels instead of 12. And it allows for a higher quality image while still being quick with the processing, and like it's less heavy, but still like higher detail than 12 megapixels. It's a good balance in between, I think. Then you got obviously the light metering options. And then this is where you can go crazy. You can mess around with like multiple exposures. You have astrophotography. You can go more in depth with that. Then you got like an ND filter. And this is something that I'll talk about very shortly after this to end the video. But basically, ND filters allow you to control the light intake more in depth than just the camera settings itself. This is like an artificial ND filter. There's actually physical ones that you can put over your camera to control that. The main difference between Expert RAW and Pro mode, like the manual camera mode, is that Pro mode, it applies no editing to the photo. It's just a raw image when you choose RAW. And then Expert RAW, it processes the image exactly like the photo mode, but then you still have your manual controls. So it's like the best of both worlds for people who don't want to edit their photos afterwards. And then in addition to all the extra features like I was saying. But yeah, Expert RAW, it deserves its own video because you can go crazy with it. Alright, so now let's get into the Pro mode or manual camera mode on the Z Fold 6. First things first though, go into settings and then go to advanced picture options, and you can choose which format your Pro mode pictures will come out in. So by default, you have JPEG, which is what the normal photo mode takes pictures in. And then you have RAW and JPEG formats, and then RAW format. So the difference between RAW and JPEG is that a JPEG image coming out of this camera will be like a more developed image. It will have some effects applied to it. The phone's like algorithms and stuff will try to make the image look a little bit nicer, versus RAW is shooting like a raw image. So it's kind of what the camera sees is what you're gonna get in a raw photo. So there's less edits, there's more detail retained, and it just gives you a lot more freedom in terms of editing a photo afterwards in like Photoshop or a different photo editing software. So some people might want to have the option to edit a raw photo for more control afterwards, and also want JPEG, you know, like a fully developed image that you can just post on Instagram. So that's why there's a combination of the two. Before you start shooting on the Pro mode, you could decide whether you want to have like JPEGs just to post them, use them quickly, or, you know, raw photos so that you can edit them a little bit more in depth. All right, so this is the Pro mode. It's kind of like the other camera modes, except you have a lot more controls when it comes to your image. So let's start with ISO. So ISO is the sensitivity of the camera sensor and how it deals with light. So for example, if at a lower ISO, the sensor is less sensitive to light, which means that you're going to get a darker image overall. But then if you boost the ISO up, then the sensor is going to be more sensitive to light, which means that you're going to get a brighter image overall. But the thing to note about ISO is generally when you go to higher ISOs, you're going to have more noise and less detail in the image. At lower ISOs, you'll capture more detail and less noise. So generally you want to stay around the lower ISO if you want like the best quality for your image. But obviously, as you can see, at 50 ISO, the image is dark. So how do you deal with that? The way to deal with that is by using shutter speed. So shutter speed now is how long the camera stays open and absorbs light to create the image. So for example, imagine it like this. At, let's say, 1 second shutter speed, the camera sensor is going to open for 1 second and then close after that second, and that will be the light that it absorbs or draws in to use for the image. So if you increase that time, then it's going to stay open longer. But the longer that the sensor is open, the more light that is going to be absorbed and used in the image, and you're going to get super bright images. So for example, if I do like, honestly, I don't even have to do a lot to show you how overexposed it will be. So let's say like 4 seconds. So if I expose the image, that's another word that you can use for the shutter being open. So if I expose for 4 seconds, then you get an image like this, because 4 seconds of the shutter being open is way too much for all the light that is going on right now, all the light that I have in the room. So generally you want to balance your ISO and your shutter speed so that you can get the ideal image for yourself. So rule of thumb is like, if you're shooting indoors, then you want to be slightly higher ISO. So there's not like there's light sources, but the light sources are not amazing. Then you want to make your ISO around, like I would say like 300 to 600, 640. And then your shutter speed, it also depends on what your subject is. So I'll get a little bit more into shutter speed here. So shutter speed also, like I said, how long the shutter stays open and captures the image. So if you're shooting a faster subject, like let's say somebody's playing sports or something like that, they're running around, then you want to have a faster shutter speed. So the bigger fraction equals, how fast the shutter will go. So this is like 1/1000 or 1,000th of a second. So super fast, basically. So I press the camera button, boom, it takes the image instantly because of how fast the shutter speed is. But obviously because the shutter is staying open for a small amount of time, then you're not taking in that much light. So you want to balance your shutter speed and your ISO based on the lighting of the situation, the lighting of the area you're in, but also the subject. So if it's something like a flower, then I don't need the shutter speed to be super high to get a decent image. I just need to light up the image well. Like for example, this flower right here, I can probably go to like 640, and then shutter speed will be like 1/45 or something like that. And then boom, I take the image, and there you go. I think it's exposed pretty decently all around. But it all comes down to preference too. So some people might like to overexpose their images, some people like to underexpose their images. Generally, I think it's better to underexpose the image, which means to like allow the image to be slightly darker than you would want, because when you underexpose it, then you can increase the brightness and still retain detail. If you overexpose an image like this, then as you can see, there's like no details in the bright parts. All the detail is gone completely when you overexpose and there's too much light. So having less light is kind of better than having too much light, because the information is still kind of there. There's more detail that is retained in the shadows versus in the light, if that makes sense. And then also, if you're not too sure about the ISO and the situation you're in, then put it on auto, and then you can adjust the shutter speed so that you can capture, whatever subject you're trying to capture. So for example, if you're taking pictures of kids and pets, like subjects that move around a lot, then I would recommend starting at like 1/125. That's a decently fast shutter speed. I think it's like a good default to start at. And then, if you need to go a little bit faster to get them in focus or take a picture of them sharply, then you can go to like 1/180, and it's pretty instant, pretty fast to get a clear shot of like your kid or your pet. This is also a nice alternative to like using the default photo mode when you're trying to capture a picture of a moving subject, because a lot of people, they have issues with Samsung phones and taking like pictures of moving subjects. So if you go into pro mode, then you can adjust your shutter speed to allow you to take a faster image and get a pretty good looking image, in my opinion too. So yeah, you have that option in pro mode. Let's move on to EV. EV is like another way to adjust the light sensitivity. It's kind of like artificially darkening or lightening the image before you even take it. This is kind of helpful, like, because you can underexpose your image by default without even thinking about it, so that you can actually edit it afterwards and like, increase the brightness and adjust the highlights and all that stuff without losing too much detail. So you can mess around with EV as you need it. But personally, I think ISO and shutter speed have you covered in pro mode. But sometimes, like if it's a really bright situation, I'll show you later on, you might have to do different things to bring down the light intake of the phone beyond its capability. Like as you can see, ISO only goes to 50. So sometimes you need to help the phone take in less light to get a good image. And then you have focus. So you can actually touch and hold this to adjust the focus manually. And basically, like you take your hand, put it in front of your face, you'll see that your eyes are focusing on your hand and everything behind your hand is blurred out. And that's basically what focus is. The camera can focus at different points in the shot that you're taking. So it can focus on the foreground or the middle or the background. And basically you adjust the focus so that your subject is either in focus or out of focus depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the image. So being able to manually control your focus is actually pretty powerful because you can do so many different things with it and you can guarantee that your subject is in focus. And one thing that is cool on Samsung devices is that basically it shows you a green highlight of what is in focus. So you kind of know what is in focus beyond just like trying to see with your own eyes. I'm pretty sure that's called focus peaking. So if I zoom in slightly, just to give you a better example, if I adjust the focus, then as you can see, there's like a highlight around different parts of the image to show me where it's focusing. But yeah, you want to play around with focus and, get that right because focus makes or breaks the image, in my opinion. And then you have like autofocus modes. So there's multi where it kind of tries to capture everything in focus. And then there is center where it prioritizes focusing on whatever is in the center of the shot. And then you have white balance. So white balance basically adjusts the color and temperature of the color based on this number right here. I believe this is like a Kelvin scale or whatever, and it goes up and down based on the temperature of colors. So you can adjust the white balance manually, or you can just leave it. Honestly, I just leave it on auto because I feel like the auto white balance is good enough most of the time. But if you feel like it's slightly off, like let's say the phone is reading warmer colors in the shot, when in real life it's actually cooler than it looks in the phone. So you can adjust the temperature here or the white balance to, make it a little bit cooler to be more neutral and natural looking. So yeah, that is basically how white balance works. It just affects the color, the temperature of the shot. And then at the top you have the same stuff. So you got your flash, you got your timer, then you got your aspect ratios, you got your 50 megapixel versus 12 megapixel mode, and all the same stuff applies to the 50 megapixel mode with like the controls and then also zooming in and out. It's the same as the regular camera mode as well. And then you have this icon right here. You could tap this to change the light metering mode. Basically what that means is that it changes the way that the camera reads the light or assesses the light situation of, the different types of shots that you might be taking. So for example, if I'm taking a landscape shot, then it says that, matrix metering is the best because it accounts for the light of the whole situation, the whole shot, everything that's going to be in the image, and then tries to balance it out according to all of that. Whereas with spot metering, this is for like backlit. So like if I have my flower right here and then let's say the window's behind it and there's a lot of light coming in from the window, then it will focus on the center and it will try to make sure that the subject, the flower in the middle of the shot, is exposed well. And so it accounts for all the light around that subject. And then center weighted metering is basically for a bigger subject or a broader area, but still focusing kind of in the middle. So it says it's good for like portrait shots and stuff like that of people. These modes are just to adjust how the phone actually takes in the light and like adjust the image in its processing. Moving on to Pro Video, this is actually a mode that a lot of cameras or a lot of phones don't have. A lot of Android phones actually have, a Pro Photo mode, but not a Pro Video mode. But basically it works exactly the same for most things, except you have a little bit more controls. So you can see that you got your mic controls. You can choose where the phone is prioritizing, receiving the mic from. So Omni is all around, omnidirectional. And then you got front. So you're mainly recording audio from the front of the phone or like from the perspective of the person holding the phone. And then you got rear, which mainly records audio from behind the phone. So this is good for like controlling where the audio is coming from, and it helps with like a clearer sound depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your video. And then you also got some different options that are grayed out. This is one option that I use a lot. This is USB. So you can actually connect a mic to the USB-C port right here and use that mic with your Z Fold 6. So I use this a lot for my wireless mics that I have. And even with my USB mics, I connect them to my Z Fold 6 using a dongle like this. This is USB-A to USB-C. Then you can also use Bluetooth mics, so you can use your headphones or your earphones. So if you have Galaxy Buds, you can actually record with audio from them, or even AirPods if you connect your AirPods to this phone. And then there's Bluetooth mix. It's mixing the audio between the Bluetooth mic and the mics built into the phone. I've never tried that mode, so I'm interested to see how it performs. And then at the top, instead of the megapixels, you got different resolutions and shutter speed options. You have all the way from 720p up to 8K. This is just based on preference and what you're going for. Personally, I like to shoot in 4K always because I think 4K is just the best. But if you want to shoot at a higher frame rate, you can actually go to 120 in just regular HD 1080p, which is pretty cool. So now let me just talk a little bit about frame rates again, because this is different from like the shutter speed. So frame rate is like each frame that is captured in the video and how many frames per second. So right here, 24 is 24 frames are being captured in 1 second, 30, and then 60. Basically, these different frame rate options give you different kinds of effects to allow you to accomplish different things in video. So for example, 24 frames per second is going to look a little bit slower. It's going to look kind of laggy even to some people. But actually a lot of movies and films and TV shows use a 24 FPS frame rate because it looks more natural to the eye, more cinematic, versus something that is 60 FPS. 60 FPS is the fastest and commonly used for like things like reality TV shows or like, you know, action shows or action shots. You capture a lot more frames and that makes the image look smoother. And then you can also slow down the image because you're capturing double the amount of frames. So that's why you might use 60 FPS. But as you can see, 60 FPS actually takes in less light because it is faster and it's recording the frames faster. So there's less opportunity for light to come in. So if you want to capture more light, then you might want to consider a lower FPS option. But personally, I would just, especially in pro mode, I would choose the frame rate based on like what you're trying to accomplish and what kind of video you're filming. So if you're filming like action shots and you want to slow it down afterwards or something like that, then you would want to record at 60 frames per second or higher. And then if you're doing like something general, like you're vlogging or something like that, then I think 30 is probably the best compromise for that. It's a good all-around FPS. But if you're doing like something cinematic, then I would probably say like 24 FPS is the best way to get like a cinematic or like, you know, professional looking shot or something like that. But one thing to note though is when you're choosing your frames per second, you have to adjust your ISO and your shutter speed accordingly, mainly the shutter speed. So the general rule of thumb that I've learned, basically for your shutter speed, you want it to be double your frames per second. So I have 30 frames per second selected right here. So I want my shutter speed to be 60. And then you adjust your ISO accordingly to get, you know, a better lit situation, a better looking image. Having your shutter speed double the amount of your frames per second just allows the image to look as clean as possible. But if you want to experiment and mess around, you can definitely raise it up and, you know, give it like a interesting looking action type of vibe, or slow it down to give it like a trail of motion, ghosty type of vibe. So you can definitely adjust the shutter speed to whatever you want, but generally the shutter speed being double the frames per second is where you want to be at for like a clean and neutral looking image. One thing I didn't talk about in the pro photography mode is actually you have access to a histogram. So basically it's this little graph right here. And if you move the camera around, you can see that the graph changes based on what's in the shot. The idea is to use this graph to balance out the highlights and the lowlights. So the left side is going to be the lowlights. You can see it spike when I go on the black foam on the wall. But then if I go to the white part of the wall, the lighter parts, then you can see the right side is spiking. So generally you want to have like a balance of that. And you can use the histogram to kind of give you some information about how the highlights and the lowlights look in your image. If you learn how to use a histogram to your advantage, it can enhance the way that you record your videos and capture images and stuff like that. But real quick, before I end the video, in order to get good pictures and videos from your phone and just cameras in general, you need to understand lighting and how lighting interacts with your different camera settings and the camera itself. So let's say the ideal settings for me right now are like 1 second shutter speed and 50 ISO. But if I take that image, it's going to be overexposed. The image is going to be too bright. So ND filters are these things, like I said earlier. So one option you have to work around that light sensitivity with the ideal settings that you want is using ND filters. So ND filters allow you to control the light intake. So if I turn it, then the filter will become more thick. This filter applies a layer above the camera with its own glass and limits the amount of light coming in. So as you can see, the image in the preview is a lot darker than it was before. If I take this shot, the overall image is going to be darker. So, you know, I can now use the ideal camera settings that I wanted to use before without overexposing the image and making it look crazy. So this is particularly useful when you're taking photos and videos outside and you don't want to overexpose everything, but you want to have certain settings. So like, let's say I'm taking pictures of a marathon and people are running and stuff, they're moving, then I would want to have a higher shutter speed so that I can capture the motion without motion blur, you know, sharp images. So 1/125 at 100 ISO, generally everything is going to look nice. But then if the sun is out, the subjects are going to look nice, but the background's going to be blown out. It's not going to look that good. But when you use a ND filter, that allows you to have those ideal settings to capture your subject sharply without overexposing the black and making it super bright like you saw in these images right here where it's overexposed. So hopefully that all makes sense, and that gives you an idea of how to work around your camera and just get better images and shots. When it comes to taking photos and videos, there's not really any one solution that works for everything. You got to figure out your own style and also what you're trying to accomplish, and also what would be best for your subject and the situation, the lighting situation, and just everything that is going to be in the image. And that just comes with like trial and error, you know, practicing, taking different shots, messing around with the camera settings. Generally, I think the Z Fold 6 cameras are actually good cameras. They're just not as good as like the best of the best phones in terms of like point and shoot photography. But I think overall, this is a really good camera system that is versatile and can do a lot. And there's so many different things that I didn't even show in this video, like using your main cameras while, you know, taking a selfie and having the viewfinder here. Like, I'll talk about that in another video, but yeah, one of the most versatile camera systems on the market right now if you learn how to use it. So that's all for this video. We are out. Peace.